Hello, Flavio here. Today we're going to be talking about the origin of suffering, the origin of pain, and I mean like this existential pain. I'm talking about that anguish, that turmoil that we feel inside that is not necessarily due to one event. It is that kind of pain that seems to last a lifetime. One of the explanations that we have as to the source of addictions, for instance, is in fact the person's unconscious mind attempting to deal with that sort of pain. So we all have pain and suffering to one extent or another because our lives are not exactly the way we want them to be, and that generates a certain degree of anguish. For instance, historically, I can only imagine what it was like for a person who is a Jew back in Germany around the Second World War and being separated from your family and feeling like you lost it all. And I would think, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I would think that at that point, a person would think, or many people would think, that their very own lives, their physical lives, matters very little. In other words, the pain of losing it all might be so intense that they barely care about their lives. In fact, Viktor Frankl, who was in the concentration camps, wrote a number of books after the war. And he says that many people would simply give up and they would die. They would, in essence, commit suicide. They would run into a machine gun or run into an electrified fence. They just wouldn't care anymore because the pain was so intense. So so this may not be your situation, that sort of, that intensity of pain, but there might be like an underlying sensation of anguish inside of you that you don't quite know what to do with. I can tell you that in my 22 years experience here at the office working with people in depth, I mean, getting deep into their psyches, into their souls, and really digging deep into what's really going on in their lives, because we do premium coaching and premium hypnotherapy here, and we do very much in-depth digging into what's really going on. And I can tell you that behind every one of our problems, there is always that underlying sense of anguish, pain, and suffering that we cannot explain. And I'll tell you where the pain comes from. Now, all of you in this audience, in this group, are people who like to read and understand things. So I'm sure that many of you have heard the four great truths of the Buddha. And the first one is that life is hard, there's pain and suffering in life. And the second truth is that attachment or desire, attachment, is the source of all suffering. So if you are a Buddhist, or if you have read much about Buddhism or anything about Buddhism, you've come across the four great truths, and you might be saying to yourself, hasn't the Buddha already answered that question many years ago? And the answer is yes, for the Buddhist. But we have a different angle on this. It's perfectly in line with what the Buddha explained, but I explain it a little bit differently. And before I explain it to you, I'd like to tell you a story. And I think that once I tell you the story, you're going to understand exactly how I figured this out for myself, because I also lived with this anguish and pain inside most of my life. So when I was in my early teenage years, I was actually until I was 23 years of age, probably from the age of 11 or 12 to about 23, I raced bicycles, and that was like a big part of my life. The training, the people, going to the races, not partying on Friday and Saturday night because Sunday mornings, early mornings were the races. So you had to be awake and sharp and rested, So cycling, competitive cycling, in many ways shaped my young life, for many reasons. All the time that you invest in training, you're not doing other things, and so on and so forth. So it was a big part of my life. And I'm glad to report to you that I won a few races, and I never became a world champion or anything. Although at that age, that's the dream, to go into the Olympics. It never happened, but because I immigrated to the United States and I took on a different direction in my life. But I raced a few times and I got a few trophies and a few medals. So there was one particular championship. I must have been 15 years of age or so, 14, 15. And my parents at the time had a beach condominium at a different town. And in that particular town, they were having this summer championship. Now, summer in Brazil, I'm from Brazil, is January, December, January, right? I mean, at the end of the calendar year. And everybody goes off on vacation. We were at the beach house. And my coach said, listen, don't you have, your parents have a property there, you have an address in that city, you're actually eligible to join this particular championship that's going to take place during the month of, during the holidays. So I signed up. I was eligible, legally eligible. I signed up. They accepted me, and there were probably 80 or 90 riders. It was a 4-race series. The first one was at night. I won that race. The second race, I also won. I won the third. And now comes the 4th race. So by the 4th race, I happened to be the #1 favorite because I had already won the previous 3, and everybody knows that. You get up on the podium, they hand you a big trophy, you are poised to be the champion for that particular series. So in cycling, if you've seen anything about cycling, what the whole thing about cycling is this thing about drafting. What drafting is you want to be really, really, really close to the rider in front of you, like almost like wheel to wheel touching, and you want to be, tuck your head really low into the handlebar, because you want to waste as little energy as possible, overcoming the wind resistance. So drafting allows you to save energy, basically, by being sort of sucked behind, this other rider in front of you. It's so in a typical bicycle race, if you haven't seen it, you have what's called a peloton. A peloton is a group of riders. Like in this case, there were 80 or 90 riders in that race. We all take off together. It's quite busy when you're taking off because people are like a few inches away from you and everybody is jumping on their bikes. In competitive cycling, your feet are strapped to the pedals. So you are, in that initial second, everybody's trying to get their feet strapped in. And basically everybody wants to take off ahead, because what you want to be able to do in some cases is break free from the peloton so that you can be in a more advantageous position at the end of the race. Well, if the peloton is riding together, one of the strategies that people use, there are many, many strategies. Cycling is a very intellectual sort of sport. There are many, many strategies that go into it, But there's this concept of breaking away. So you basically sprint up ahead of the peloton, and ideally if you can have 2 or 3 riders with you so that you can take turns opening the wind, basically, you might be able to pull away from the peloton, and then the race is really not, against 80 other riders, but only against 2 or 3 that broke away from the peloton with you. So anyway, I'm the favorite in this particular race because I won the previous 3, and we take off. And I know, of course, by then, you have a coach and, you're competitive, so you study your competition, of course, and they are studying me and I'm studying them, of course, Plus my coach is doing his job and we're all studying one another. So I know who to spot. In other words, I know who the strong riders are. And I'm watching them to see if they break away, because if they break away, I want to go after them. So that's exactly what happens. We take off. We're coming around the first, I remember it was a left-hand turn like this, and this guy breaks away. And there's no thinking at that instant, because if you think, you lose. It's an immediate reaction. I get up out of my seat and I sprint over to catch him. And, and it's a little bit more technical than the way it sounds, because when you're in the middle of a peloton, you have 80 other guys around you, inches away from you. So when the guy breaks away and he's over there, it isn't as simple as sprinting to catch up with him. You have to maneuver your way through, and sometimes people block you intentionally. It's a race, after all. Everybody wants to win. Not everybody can break through, and so some people prefer to block others who are trying to break through. Anyway, it's a competitive thing. I maneuver around the riders. I get over to this man, and I begin to draft him while I recover my breath, basically, because I just did a huge effort to catch up with him. And so, just like I explained to you earlier, I tuck my chin into my handlebar, I get really low on my handlebar, and all I can see is the rear edge of his, the rear edge of his rear wheel and the front edge of my front wheel, and they're almost touching, and I'm there drafting from him while I'm recovering, right, for a few minutes. And suddenly, as I'm looking down, and all I can see is his wheel and my wheel, and as I'm looking down, the texture of the asphalt, because we're racing on these streets, right? The texture of the asphalt is completely different, and that's all I can see. And when I look up, when I look up, the peloton is all the way over there, all the way over there. That guy was not a legitimate racer. He was placed there. In Brazil, we call them a rabbit, a decoy. He was placed there knowing that if he broke free, I would go after him. I was the favorite, and he would pull me away from the race. That was his intention. That was the whole plan of the thing, so racing is racing, right? It's not exactly a clean move, but that's what they did. So when I look up and I see the peloton, I can tell you there's pain there, because I want to win as well, plus I didn't like being fooled, obviously. So there's a double whammy there because I'm recovering from this massive sprint. I'm still in the recovery, it's a couple minutes into this thing, and I'm on a different road already, so the regulations about whether you took a shortcut or not, you got to go back to the road where you left the road. I mean, there's a number of things that I have to consider in a split second there. Do I abandon the race? Do I go back where I left the course? Anyway, I was a little upset, I guess, that they had done this to me, and I was determined. And I guess what that does is like increases your adrenaline. I wanted to win the race, and in a split second, I decided I'm going after the peloton, and that's exactly what I did. I had to maneuver backwards because, like I said, I cannot be skipping a piece of the course. I got back on the road. There's nobody there by now. And I can see those guys way out there in the distance, and I did what my coach told me, and I got down on my handlebar and I started pushing those pedals like crazy, and boom, I catch up with the back of the peloton. And you would think that that the problem is over, right? So now I have to recover in the back of the peloton, make my way to the front of it, right? And then soon, it's a relatively short race, maybe 30 kilometers, soon we have the end of the race, and now you have to sprint, because in these criterium races where it's like an oval course or a short course, you're going around the course, sometimes the peloton doesn't thin out. It's a very short race. So the final sprint can be very treacherous. You have a bunch of people sprinting like crazy towards the finish line, it can be a little confusing. So on a longer race, the peloton thins out, and then you don't quite have those situations in most cases. But in a shorter race, it can get hairy. So the thing is that, I'm recovering, and as I'm recovering, I start making my way to the front of the peloton, and I know we're coming up on the last lap, and I position myself for the final sprint. And as I do so, another guy had the job of squeezing me onto the curb. I was on the right-hand side of the street, and I still remember this. And as I get up out of my seat to go for it, this guy closes in on me and basically pushes me off the road. Of course, there's a curb, there's a gutter and a curb, and if you go too close to the curb, of course, your pedals hit and you fly off, because you're pedaling pretty hard at that point. And so this guy basically closes in on me. Well, once again, the adrenaline, I guess, and the rush and the finish line over there, I basically threw my shoulder onto him, and he didn't crash. I didn't crash either, but I was able to push him off. I guess it was a little heavier, I'm not sure, or maybe just the angle, the way I did it. I was able to push him off and sprint past a couple of guys and win the race. And you would think that's why I'm telling you this story. Oh, he won the race. He's just telling us the story. No. The reason I'm telling you this story is to tell you about the origin of suffering. Remember the decoy? They sent me the rabbit, they call it, the decoy, the guy that was placed in the race to pull me away from the race. We do this to ourselves all the time. You see, when we start the race of life, when we're born, there is a finish line. We have an idea what it is that we want to accomplish. We have a goal. We have a purpose. The world is full of decoys. The world is full of people, situations, ideas that are designed, that are placed there to pull your attention away from your goal. They're decoys. So here's where the suffering comes from. We become attached. Remember the Buddha? So suffering comes from attachment. We become attached to a decoy. That decoy, that thing that is incidental, that is not important in the overall picture of our lives, that thing becomes our fascination, becomes we become obsessed with it. in some cases. People become obsessed with money, with their careers, with their cars, with whatever, their girlfriends, boyfriends, I mean, whatever. We become obsessed with other people, with other things, with our bodies, with our physique, whatever the case might be. That obsession with the decoy completely derails our lives. We basically follow a different destiny, just like I did. Just like I did. You know, and I noticed that I was off track because as I'm looking down on my bicycle, I see that the surface of the road looks different. I'm off the road. The pain of looking at the peloton over there, the pain of looking at your own destiny over there while you're over here is huge. You know, it's a very difficult pain to deal with because usually by the time you realize that you've been pursuing the wrong dream, by the time you realize that you've been pursuing a decoy, not your dream, usually by that time you're a little older. And in other words, kids, you know, they might say, oh, okay, I wanted to study geometry, but I was studying geography or whatever the case is. You know, maybe I'll sign up next semester. In other words, at that age, we feel, number one, invincible. Number two, we feel that we're eternal. We don't have this concept of longevity and time. And so you think, okay, not a big deal. So the kind of pain is a little different. But as we begin to live our lives, you know, and you see that, okay, this is a great opportunity. This is a sacred, divine opportunity that we have to do something on this earth. And you see that to build and rebuild and to get back on the road and to get back behind the peloton and to make your way back to the front of the peloton is going to take a whole lot of energy. And in some cases, you question yourself, don't you? Or is it just me? You question, am I going to have the energy, the stamina to get back to the front of this peloton of life? And will I have what it takes to sprint into the finish line as a number one rider? You see, life is not a competition. It's not like you have to win and be better than your neighbor, but you know that there's a victory for you, which is when you accomplish what you came here to accomplish. There is the finish line, there is the goal, there is that notion deep within us. We all know it and we have it. But there's also the decoy over here that calls our attention, and that's how lives are ruined. So pain and suffering comes from the conscious or unconscious realization that we have been pursuing the wrong ideals. My job, my pledge to you is to help you get back on the peloton and cross the finish line number one. Number one. See, we don't have to be better than anybody else. We don't have to impress anybody. We don't have to accumulate anything to show off to anybody else. None of this is important or necessary because remember, you know, this is temporary anyway. You know, we're living here today and one day we're not going to be around anymore and we're not going to take anything with us, but we will take this. We will take the pride that we feel inside, the healthy pride of knowing that we lived the life that we came here to live. And that's what I want for you. That's what I want for me and that's what I want for you. And if you've been following my work for a while, and if you're watching this video, undoubtedly you're going to tell me, dude, you've changed. And I'm going to tell you yes, as a result of pain and suffering. I've had to do what I'm now here sharing with you and suggesting that you do as well. We got to dig deep inside and find out what is our objective in this lifetime. And we have to be honest enough with ourselves to recognize that many of the things we've been pursuing have been decoys that were placed there to deviate us from our path. They're not part of our path. Different for you and for me, people are different, but throughout these next several videos and throughout our conversations, and if you want to talk to me personally or whatever in whatever way I can assist you throughout this period, you're going to notice that our pain and suffering comes from the realization that we've been pursuing the wrong ideals. Remember, there's magic in life. We're just getting started.